pal.
Okay.
Here we are, after 50 years, back at Warner Brothers, and where we started, and got a really good chance to make films. And it's nice to see you again after all this time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My God, time goes by so quickly.
Yes.
But Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was about the first time we were brought together professionally.
That's right. You know, seeing you again reminds me of the basic thing about friendship in this life is if you find two people who have similar loves, then they start a friendship. Ray fell in love with the Lost World in 1925 out here on the coast, and I fell in love with the Lost World in Waukegan, Illinois. And we finally met when we were both 18, and we discovered we loved dinosaurs and Willis O'Brien and the Lost World. And that film changed both of our lives, and that cemented our friendship. And we knew we were crazy because the whole world didn't give a damn about our loves. So we stuck together, hoping that someday he would animate dinosaurs and I'd write the screenplays. And that's how it finally turned out.
And I remember we had long conversations. Ray lived in Venice and I lived in Leimert Park. And we used to have long conversations about plotting out ways of putting these dinosaurs on the screen, with Ray writing the story and the script and my animating.
The great thing about friendship is you're always calling each other. This is back in the late 30s. And Ray would call me on the phone and say, "My God, King Kong is appearing over in Pasadena tonight for 15 cents. So he'd pick me up in his car, and we'd go to Pasadena, always a cheap theater for 15 cents. And we saw She and the...
Last Days of Pompeii.
Last Days of Pompeii.
She.
So we provoked each other constantly with these cheap thrills. I remember we were in one theater, the Maynard Theater, one night, and we waited for the show to begin. It was 7 o'clock, but I'd been in that theater before, and I noticed that at 7 o'clock, the manager came in and called upstairs and say, "Okay, Bill." And so we got tired of waiting, and I said, "Wait here." And I went back to the doorway leading up to the projection room. I said, "Okay, Bill," and the film began. and we saw another production of King Kong.
Oh, those were the good old days.
Yeah.
That's how we first met, at the Little Brown Room in Clifton's Cafeteria in the heart of Los Angeles.
That's right.
And we had Kuttner, and we had a Egyptologist, and we had
Walt Doherty.
Walt Doherty, and a rocket expert, and various people in that line.
The Rocket Society started upstairs in Clifton's Cafeteria, and they wound up sending a rocket to the moon and a rocket to Mars. But that all started with we crazy people in Clifton's Cafeteria.
And everybody, when we talked outside, they thought we were a little peculiar because we were talking about going to Mars, going to the moon, and going back in prehistoric time.
But that's the kind of crazy people we were.
Oh, happy day.
He loved to make masks. He was the first person in the United States to make the rubber mask you could fit over your face with a grotesque aspect to it. And he did a life mask of me, one of the few I've ever had made. And then he did a grotesque mask that he sold to me, really horrible. And you can buy them in a Halloween store today. But in those days, I was alone in the whole country, right?
We
went to see The Cat and the Canary at the Paramount Theater with Ray and Forey Ackerman. I wore my mask, and in the middle of the show, I leaned forward and tapped the girl ahead of me, and she turned and looked at me and let out this beautiful scream. You know? And we were almost
Fay Ray, I think it was.
Yeah, we were almost ejected from the theater. Yeah. The whole history of dinosaurs is impossible. It's hard to believe they were created, and they lived for a couple of million years and died. So we were in love with the bulk of the dinosaurs. And then later, in his life, he decided, what the hell, they're not alive, I got to make them live again. And that's what he did.
Yes, and I think it's a spectacular quality of the dinosaur. The dinosaur is so unbelievable, with big fins on its back, and the size of it is monstrous. And we had this love for them, seeing the skeletons and the bones, and particularly the restorations of Charles R. Knight. Charles R. Knight restored them with the flesh over them in these beautiful paintings. And that's what I followed in making my animals, are the Charles Knight. They dragged their tails. And today they say, no, they didn't drag their tails. They're up in the air. And I don't like that. I still like my dinosaurs to drag their tails because they look, when they're up in the air, they look rather strained and if I may use the term, constipated.
Our love was so complete because in 1932, they had a World's Fair in Chicago, and you went in on a rotating platform past the dinosaurs, which screamed and yelled and moved as you went by. But the whole thing went by in 2 minutes. So I came up with this solution of walking backwards. And I stayed in the damned exhibit for 10 minutes walking backwards to look at those dinosaurs. And the owners of the ride came in and threw me out because I was blocking traffic. But it's one more proof of how crazy we were for these monsters. A producer who will not be named called us to the studio around 1950, before both of us were very well established with anything. But he wanted to see Ray's dinosaur real. So we went out to Hollywood. There's a small studio there, and we trudged across the lot in the hot sun. The producer was there. He didn't get up. He didn't say hello. He said, hand your reel of film over to the projectionist and sit down. So Ray and I sat in the front row grumbling because no one was paying attention to us. And they ran his 20-minute reel of dinosaur films. Beautiful, beautiful. I never got tired of them. And when it was over, nobody said anything. Nobody said, well done, or we love you, or we hate you. And we left the studio and we grumbled even more, crossing the lot in the hot sun. We hated everybody. So we got home, and 2 years later, by a wonderful coincidence, I was at the Pickwood Theater, and there was the preview that I didn't know was going to be on. And lo and behold, on the screen comes this dinosaur film made by this producer. It was horrible. When it was over, my wife and I went out in the lobby. There's the producer that we hate, standing there, surrounded by his yes men who were telling him how great the film is. I plowed through the crowd. I stuck out my hand. I said, sir. He looked up. I said, Ray Bradbury? He said, oh, yeah, Ray. I said, it won't make a dime. Good night. And I went back, and I went home happy. Comeuppance time for Ray and for me. Well, to prove my love for my pal here, I was so upset at the way that producer treated him that along the way I wrote a short story called Tyrannosaurus Rex, in which Ray is hired by this producer to create a dinosaur to make a film. But as the film progresses, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, this monstrous, meat-eating beast, begins to look more and more like the producer. And people don't want to say anything. And the producer falls in love with the dinosaur because he's falling in love with himself. So that's my story, a tribute to Ray. When I lived in Venice, California with my wife, we were walking along the beach one night, and I saw the ruins of the Venice Pier. They just torn it down, and the roller coaster was lying in the sand. And I looked at the roller coaster skeleton, and I said to my wife, I wonder what that dinosaur is doing lying here on the beach. She was very careful not to answer. And 2 nights later, I woke in the middle of the night because something had called me awake. I sat up in bed and I looked out the window. There was nothing 10 miles north from Venice, nothing 10 miles south. But way out in Santa Monica Bay, I heard the foghorn blowing over and over and over again. I said, yes, that's it. The dinosaur heard the foghorn blowing, thought it was another dinosaur arisen from 1 billion years of slumber, and swam in for an encounter with this other beast and discovered it was only a damned lighthouse and a damned foghorn, and tore the whole thing down and died of a broken heart on the beach. I got out of bed the next day and I wrote The Foghorn Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. In 3 hours, sent it off to the Saturday Evening Post. They bought it instantly, and it changed my life because it brought me in contact with Ray again. And then, 2 years later, John Huston read that short story and thought he smelled the ghost of Herman Melville in it and gave me the job of writing the screenplay of Moby Dick. So that one story changed my life, his life, forever, huh?
I was approached by Jack Dietz about the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. It was called at that time Monster from the Deep. Mr. Dietz saw some of my tests that I made for evolution, and he wanted to see if I would be interested in doing the monster for this picture. And so I went over to the studio and met Eugene Laurier, who was the art director at the time and the director. And one day, when we were working on the script together, Jack Dietz came in with the Saturday Evening Post. It showed this beautiful illustration of the beast attacking a lighthouse, a big sea monster, a story by Ray Bradbury. I thought, oh my God, I think he contacted you to come in and read the script we had, and you can go on from there.
Well, they didn't tell me they'd seen my story in the Saturday Evening Post. So I went to the studio and they showed me the screenplay and said, will you go in the next room and read it and tell us if you'll help us with this? So I went in the next room and I read what they had, and I came back and intuitively said, excuse me, but this sort of reminds me of a story of mine that was in the Saturday Evening Post. The producer's jaw dropped, and I realized I'd have caught them in the midst of being involved with my story without my knowing it, huh? I went away from there. I said, I'll think about it. The next day, I got a telegram saying, we want to buy the rights. So there never was any trouble. They immediately knew they had to buy the story, and thank God for that, because the film finally got underway, and Ray had a chance to animate the dinosaur tearing down the lighthouse. On Halloween night, we invited Fritz Lang and Ray to our house, and he brought his puppets, his marionettes. And once again, we realized what we were working with. He had the ability of making a puppet walk like Betty Davis. Well, that's impossible, isn't it? Nobody can do that. I never saw anyone do that. But it was in the hands, huh? It was in the hands. And they controlled the strings. And suddenly, that puppet down on the floor was walking like Betty Davis. So he was born with these genes. That's the secret, this mysterious thing that his hands do. And then his hands tell his mind later, you may not have noticed, sir, but I did this. And there it is.
Well, it's a haunting thing. I think we're all born in a certain time for a certain degree. I believe in the fickle finger of fate. And it's a pleasure when I go to these various conventions and see these young people, a family of 3 generations will come up for an autograph and say, your films made my life. Your films made my childhood. And that is a nice feeling. So the snowball rolls on. Willis O'Brien changed my whole life, and the snowball gets bigger, and then CGI came in, and Lord knows what's going to come next.
And he quit at the right time, too, because Clash of the Titans has some of the greatest animation in it that he ever did. You know, fantastic stuff. It is simply sublime. 9 or 10 years ago, Ray got his honorary Oscar from the Academy Awards people. And I called the Academy and I said, if I don't get to give him his Oscar, I'm going to come over and blow up the place, huh? So they said, give him his Oscar. So I was there the night Tom Hanks introduced both of us, and I did a little speech. In that speech, I said, how wonderful it is that we grew old together, but we never grew up, huh? That's the secret, that we're still young boys. Nothing has changed. We're still as young as we were when we were watching King Kong and the Lost World. A year ago, my star was put on Hollywood Boulevard, about 3 blocks from where Ray's star was put the other day. I've got plans. Some midnight soon, I'm going to go on Hollywood Boulevard and dig up my star and bring it down and plant it next to Ray's where it belongs, because we're old partners, old loving friends, and that's the least I can do.
And we
God
love
bless
the
you, Ray.
cinema.
Thank you.